My name is David Kétszeri. I work for GS1 Hungary for more than 12 years now. And I was asked to provide you a short overview into our set of standards, GS1 global standards, which is always, I would say, great honor, but on the other hand, a great challenge, because it's always very difficult to summarize something which is so huge and robust and provides such a huge, tremendous savings for the whole supply chain, regardless of which sector we are talking about. And now I have like 30, 40 minutes to summarize it and help you to understand. First of all, may I ask you, how many of you have already heard about GS1? Okay, well, those who are working for GS1 organizations doesn't count. So. Okay, how many of you have heard about, let's say, application identifiers? Okay, it's a few. And another last question, how many of you heard about GPC, Global Product Classification? What a nice word. None. Oh, no, there's only a few. Okay, so anyway, I think it will make sense actually to make this overview about the standards. And also for those who are the first time being here or have just heard about, let's say, GS1, but really didn't go into the details, there is an acronym decoder. This is a short paper that you can find on the registration desk. I can highly recommend you to take that one because it will help you to decode what we are talking about. Obviously, I think all of the speakers are trying to get rid of those acronyms that we are used to use during our presentation, but still you may find some of those acronyms. This is a nice slide I always like to start with, because we can compare the GS1 standards to Google, which is a much more well-known name, I would say, for most of the people. If you take this number, 5 billion scans every year, that's a huge number. Every day, that's a huge number. It's something that you can compare that, holy God, 5 billion, it's a lot. And if you imagine that you are queuing in a retail store and you are trying to pay at the cashier, then all of a sudden you realize, okay, what is about, or let's say you start realizing the benefits of GS1 standards by scanning those barcodes that you can find on the products on the shelves. So I would say we are on the same level with Google. In some way, we are a bit above Google, I would say. But it's always a great pleasure to say that all standards are so implemented, and the implementation of our standards are just growing day by day and contribute to all of our benefits working in the supply chain. GS1, there are many definitions, and I've heard a lot of introduction to GS1. All of them are true, I would say, and it's really difficult to say what we are on one slide, but GS1, I usually put in a way that this is a neutral platform, user-driven platform to create standards for the whole sake of the industry or sectors that are deciding to implement those standards. So we are a non-for-profit organization. We are neutral, meaning that we are not actually, we cannot be considered as solution providers. We are providing the basis of solutions and technical or process solutions, and we are working together with the sector, key players of different sectors. And this is also very important, I think. During the last couple of decades, we have proven that all standards are not just for one specific sector. Many times we are considered, yes, GS1 is a standardization organization, but only for the retailer sector, which is not true any longer because of the global supply chain, because of those kind of things which are causing that every single company is now, not every single, but most of the companies are not any longer connected to one specific sector, but they are working all along different sectors, healthcare, transport and logistics, and retail. So all standards, thanks to this developments in the last couple of decades, all standards are also being adopted quite widely in other sectors. We create our standards through collaboration. Collaboration means very much to us. All of our standards and based on the standards, all of our solutions actually are done in a collaboration. All standards are defined and created through the GSMP, Global Standard Management Process, where we hugely involve the users. Actually, the users are driven the standardization. They are the ones defining the goals and the aims of our standards and where standards are needed. And we, GS1, basically just provide a neutral platform when those industry players can meet and agree on a common standards. And then obviously we take the technical part and we create the standards and manage the standards, which is very important. There are many standards around the world, obviously, but there are many standards out of those existing standards where you don't have any kind of management afterwards. So once it's released, it's there, and well, you are there to go and implement. No support, nothing else. And I think that's the big difference with GS1, that due to this global availability of GS1 is represented in directly more than 110 countries. And that provides you, to the user community, a huge opportunity that you can take in terms of support the implementation, support the adoption of GS1 standards, really starting with drafting the IDs, processes, as long as, until the very end of the implementation where you have a system in place. We have around between 1.5 to 2 million users. Users means those companies implementing our standards, which is also a quite huge number, and it is increasing again day by day. And the more users, the more companies starting using our standards, the more benefit the current users will have. So it's a system, it's a process that actually gets better and better every year, year, day, months, in parallel with the increase of the number of users. When we are talking about core sectors for GS1, as I said, it's not only retail, but it's also the transport and logistics, and also the healthcare sector. But besides these 3 core sectors, there are another 20 sectors where we are presented now. It's agriculture, chemicals, and so defense, and so on. So it's just getting bigger and bigger. And why we are there is to support all of these sectors to get on board with GS1 standards. And together we help to identify those areas where GS1 standards can help a lot. Sometimes we get the feeling that companies, or not companies, but partners or other organizations consider us, yes, they are the guys who are serving the needs of the big companies, which is again not so true. If you take the users, those companies who are using our standards, actually, they are really the small SMEs, as well as the medium-sized companies, as well as the real global organization. And I think that this also shows the power of our standards, that it doesn't need to be a huge company to be in a position to adopt our standards. It can be a small company as well, and believe me, GS1 standards will provide you those benefits that will actually help you to increase the efficiency in your own supply chain. Naturally, we are not just working directly with the users, but also we are working with those other organizations which are important to specific sectors or in general. NATO, the Consumer Goods Forum, the EU itself. And there are many ways and many initiatives where we are working together. Again, here, the basic aim and goal of GS1 is to be there to represent our users' needs and to represent standards, that we need standardized solutions in order to drive efficiency in the supply chain, and also to increase the visibility of supply chain, regardless which sector we are talking about. And obviously, we need this strategic alliance with other organizations in order to achieve our goals. Now, if we are talking about the GS1 standards, now this is the slide where I usually lose I'd say 80% of my audience, but still I like that slide because that tries to summarize very in a very good way what I was talking about on the previous slide, the main pillars of the standards. See the GS1 identification keys. I will go into more details in the during the upcoming slides. Then you have the data carriers, and then you have the way how to share information along the supply chain. And there are many standards below this surface. But this is, I think, the three main takeaways that you need to remember when we are talking about GS1 standards. How to identify things, how to actually put, let's say, physically display those identification keys of products, barcodes. This is the most visible part, obviously, and then how to communicate product or asset-related data. We are not just talking about, obviously, about products, but anything that can occur in a supply chain. So it can be a location, it can be a pallet, it can be a container, etc. There are specific global identification keys to identify those things. And the processes, once you have all these things in place, you will be able to have standardized processes that will contribute to efficiency, safety, collaboration, and sustainability. So all those hot topics that nowadays we are talking about, any international conferences that we have on any specific topic, normally these words will come up, and you can hear those words that, sustainability, safety, patient safety, food safety, and all these things can be improved a lot by adopting standardized processes based on standardized way of communication, way of identification. Now, this conference and why we are here is obviously a very specific of the things that I mentioned. This is the healthcare sector, one of our core sectors. And I think besides the retail sector, probably it's getting the highest attention, the healthcare sector, because in the last 10 years, I think together as the industry, we have achieved a lot in terms of implementing GS1 standards in this very specific sector, and it's thanks to the very good collaboration in the GS1 global healthcare community. So it is basically the healthcare, the global healthcare program is nothing more than to gather the industry, the key players of the industry, provide a platform where the industry can define those areas where GS1 standards can help, and try to identify those things where GS1 standards need to be more specific in order to meet all the requirements that the healthcare sector is requiring. So basically this is the user community for the GS1 standards in the healthcare sector, and they are defining the way how to move on. And GS1 organizations, GS1 colleagues are only there to support this and make it happen and help you and help the user community to adopt GS1 standards in a way that will be most beneficial for all of us. Why we need standards? I think there was a really good report published in 2012 by or 13 from McKinsey, and they were exploring the possible benefits that you can gain by adopting global standards in the healthcare sectors. And those numbers that I've written on the slide, I will not read those figures. And there are much more actually in the report. I can only recommend to download it from the Global Office website. It's available there. But those figures I clearly show that there is a huge potential for standards. And there's a huge potential of adopting a single standard or a common standards, because if every country deciding to use different standards for the same reasons, for the same purpose, then actually we'll end up by the end of the day that we don't actually have a standard, which is not the goal. The goal is to adopt one single global standard to meet all the requirements and drive the efficiency. And all these numbers, in theory, can be achieved by adopting standards. And luckily, in several countries, the adoption of GS1 standards in the healthcare sector has been already started. And there are already really nice best practices available. And I think, without any exception, all of these case studies, best practices, are just confirming these numbers. Obviously on a smaller scale, like in one hospital or in one specific region, but all these figures are showing that actually there is a huge benefits of adopting standards, and it's worth doing it. In some cases, it's 1 and 1.5 years, and you have a return on investment, because we are not hiding the fact that when you change your processes, when you adopt a new system, then it creates cost, obviously. But if you can have a return on investment after 1 or 2 or 3 years, I think that's absolutely something that's worth considering it. Now, because it's actually a technical, or not technical, but let's say, I'm supposed to provide you a bit more details in the different standards of GS1. Now, in the upcoming slides, I will drive you quickly through those main pillars that I mentioned before to make you familiar at least with the words. Now, I'm not an expert in any of these topics, so if you have questions, I may try to answer at the end of this slide deck, or alternatively, I can only recommend to contact one of our colleagues during the coffee break and get some more information if you're interested. Or there is another good way. GS1 is presented in every single, or not every country, but in more than 110 countries. So there's a good chance that there is a local GS1 member organization in the country where you're coming from. So you can anytime contact the local GS1 member organization. That will help you to provide much more details about the standards. Okay. So let's move on, and let's get a better understanding of the 4 main pillars of GS1 standards. Identification, as I said, the global language, the basis, the fundamentum of the GS1 standards. So that's the very core we are talking about. That's basically what an industry or a user needs to adopt in order to be able to later on communicate in a standardized way. That's the English, if you remember what I told you before, that this is the English language for communication in the supply chain. This number is globally unique, and it enables you globally to refer to one specific asset in the supply chain, regardless whether you're talking about product, pallets, containers, locations, legal entities. We have those identification keys that are used to identify that specific asset. It says neutral, and also it's not related to any sector, so it's not sector specific at all. It's neutral. You can use in the healthcare sector the same identification keys. You can use in the transport and logistics. You can use in defense, etc. It's the general identification keys, the general core of our common language of business, if you wish. The all identification, the set of identification keys and the dissemination of those keys are done locally. That's why we have, or that's not the only reason why we have the member organizations all around the world, but one of the key roles is actually to provide you those global company prefixes from which you as a user will be able to create those identification keys that are needed for you to identify in your processes and to enable you actually to start using all standards. It's so if you're coming from any country, you just need to contact the local GS1 member organization, and they will enable you to get or they will provide you this global company prefix, and from that you will be able to start creating your own identification keys depending on what you really need to identify. Probably the 2 most popular identification keys that you may have heard about is one is the GTIN, the Global Trade Item Number, that you can find on all of the products in the store. If you go to a shop, you just take one of the products from the shelves, and you see a number on it below the barcode. Now that number is the Global Trade Item Number that identifies globally and uniquely that specific product. And that's the basis of the communication in the supply chain. That's the reference to use to identify that specific product. It doesn't need to be a mineral water. It can be obviously a pharmaceutical. It can be obviously any other sort of things that you can consider as a product. It really depends on you how you define a product and what is your product. But the GTIN is there to identify that. GLN, the global location number, maybe the name is a bit misleading because it's not just to uniquely identify locations in the supply chain, but also to globally and uniquely identify legal entities. So you, as a legal entity, as a company, is identified in a communication, in the GS1 communication by GLNs, and also the locations where the product goes in the supply chain are identified by GLNs. And then we have several other identification keys. I will not go through all of those things because it's going more into the details. And as I said, if you need more information on that, then contact the expert at the local MO. But the main message here is that basically for all assets, all kinds of assets that you can imagine that can occur in the supply chain, we have an identification keys for that. And instead of using your internal numbers or sector-specific numbers, I can only recommend to switch and use these standards because that will enable you to communicate in the global, regional, or open supply chain, basically. That's the basis of, and that's the fundamentum of being able to communicate with the others. It's not rocket science, I would say, so it's very basic. It's quite simple to how to allocate, how to use these identification keys, but there are specific rules to follow. And that's why we actually define those allocation rules that meant to provide the same basis for every users to use or GS1 identification keys. What I mean is how you define a product, when I need to change a global identification number to a specific product, and things like that. So how, to which product hierarchy I should allocate a new GTIN, and I can just go on. So there are those guidelines which are attached actually to these numbers, and I can only just again recommend you to read those guidelines before you start adopting. But still, the best way in order to avoid any wrong usage is to contact the MO, local MO, and the local MO will help you, will guide you through the implementation and also onboarding process. So they will be there to help you from the beginning until the very end of the implementation and even further. And if we're talking about the healthcare sector, it's nothing special, I would say, from our point of view. There are products, there are product hierarchy, and all identification keys are there to identify medical devices, vaccines, etc. It's there, and it's very capable to do the business there. Now, once we identified the assets in the supply chain, obviously we need something to display those identification keys physically on the products. And this is naturally the barcodes that we are talking about, or the RFID. This is the two main way how to do it. And why we need those kind of things is basically to enable the automatic identification. So when we are talking about processes, warehouse management, and things like that, the more automatic the processes are, instead of typing in those identification keys when you're receiving a goods, instead of that, you just need to scan a barcode or read an RFID tag, and all the data is in the system, and then the system can, of course, process the data and manage according to your processes. But first, you need to have those identification carriers in place and in the correct way. And this is, again, we are providing there the standardized way to do this. Oops. Okay. I was just talking about two main things, that barcodes and RFID tags. Without going into the details, for the barcodes, obviously, it needs to be visible. So if you don't see the barcode, you will not be able to scan it. With RFID technology, we are using radio frequency. So actually, you don't need to actually see the tag itself. It can be much more efficient in a proper environment, not always, but this is again where the experts are there to provide you help, which is the better way to identify your assets, your products. Is it the barcode? Is it the linear barcode? Or is it actually, nowadays we see quite often data matrix, which is a 2D code, where you can put much more information, which I should use. There the experts are there. GS1's colleagues will help you to find the best solution for you. Some people say that, well, yeah, about barcodes, they don't have the right capacity to put all the information I need for that specific product. The first thing is, especially in the IT environment, we are trying to say that, well, try to use those global numbers, identification numbers as key to data. But naturally, there can be still cases where you need additional information like lot number, expiry date, things like that. And luckily, even the barcodes, the good old barcodes, linear barcodes, are able to provide or to store those data, not to mention the fact that a 2D code can store thousands of characters. So it's basically, there are no limits related to the information that you would like to put in a data carrier. And it's really up to the specific case that you would like to use it, and it's up to a decision that you need to make. But what I'm saying is that the data or the different barcodes have the capability also to put more information in it. The most important part when we are talking about the data carriers, and if you want to put more data into data carriers, is actually the standardized structure of the data. It's more important than the data carrier itself. So we were talking about identification keys. Yes, that's one thing. But then you need to put the additional information, also lot number, expiry date, etc., in a standardized, structured way. And once you do this, that will basically enable you to operate in the supply chain with other partners, because then, regardless whether it's an RFID or if it's a linear GS1128 code or it's a GS1 data matrix, you will be able to interpret the data which is there once you use the common standard of putting additional information in the data carrier. As you can see, this is a long linear barcode, but the data encrypted here is basically the same that you can find here. The structure is the same. So the IT system behind that, supporting your warehouse management processes, they don't need to adjust it to this or to this. If the data structure is the same, they will be able to process. Of course, you need the right barcode reader in place, but the IT system behind that doesn't need to be actually adjusted in case you're using the same structure of data. And these are structured in the GS1 language are defined by application identifiers. Application identifiers define actually first the type of the data coming after the application identifier, and also the format of data coming afterwards. So with the application identifiers, you will be able to create your information in a standardized way, and that will ensure that the other partners along the supply chain will understand the additional information encoded in the data carrier as well. Here are some of the application identifiers that I listed, which is healthcare specific. Obviously, each of the sector has some specific things, but there are common application identifiers as well, like the lot number, expiry date, date of production. And all of these are defined in our standards, in the general specification. It's a really nice book to read, so if you are bored, you can read anytime, and I can guarantee you will enjoy, because it's very, very interesting stuff to read. Now, once we learn the language, how to identify things, and once we understand how to physically actually put that or display that information on our assets or on our products, then the second or the third step is actually to learn how to communicate the data related to that specific product or asset in a standardized way. right? So that's also very important, to be able to communicate with my partners the data in advance in order to increase speed, efficiency again. And I think it's very familiar to several of you who are operating in a supply chain or in any healthcare specific entity, how things are managed. If you want to order something, if you want to order a product, then normally you need to have catalogs in place. Then if you have one catalog, you need to make sure that it is the most updated catalog. And then if there is another catalog available to the same product, then you need to make a decision which is the relevant, which is the, let's say, more accurate, and things like that, which makes life not so easy in many cases. And also these catalogs many times are available only in written form, and maybe in a PDF, maybe. Or maybe there is a link to a website, things like that. So it's not so obvious that you can, by clicking on one button, you can get product information for your e-procurement process, for instance. And this situation is actually the source of extra cost, additional cost. There are, again, very good reports trying to explore the potential cost saving by taking out this additional burden from the processes, meaning that you don't have reliable, up-to-date information related to the item that you are talking about. It's huge. It's huge. Again, we can put many, many numbers and many, many reports on it. There is a huge saving, potential saving that we can realize by adopting a standardized process to exchange data related to items in the supply chain. The only thing we need to make sure is that there is a way for a supplier to create information, product-related information in a standardized way, and to communicate that data in a standardized way. And there is a way for the recipient, let's say for the retail store or for the hospital, to get the information in the same standardized way, and ensure that this is authorized source. This is up-to-date information, and this is the information that the supplier updated recently, and the supplier only needs to do it once, and the recipients will receive it immediately or upon request. So that's, in theory, it sounds quite simple, but it's not an accident that it has not happened, or there are still, let's say, many room for improvement in terms of implementing these kind of solutions. And due to the fact that there was a need, GS1 created the standardized way to create and then share master data-related information for the supply chain participants. And this is the Global Data Synchronization Network, which is actually enabling the companies to share item, product-related information in a standardized way, and allowing the players all along the supply chain to communicate on the same way about the same item. How it is done, it's quite, well, let's say, complex system, but the main thing is it creates or it defines a framework how a data pool should set up, how the information about the product, how the attributes related to the product should be built up, and then also defines the framework how this data needs to be communicated. And by setting those standards, we can have a, let's say, a certification process that makes sure that those data pools following the same rules are interoperable and can communicate with each other. So regardless if you're a supplier, regardless to which data pool you're connected and where your data is stored and where you update the data, the information will be available for all of the other data pools connected to the same system and using the same way to communicate information. Thus, you, as a supplier, you need to manage your data only to one direction, and the recipient can also have only one single point of access to the data and get the relevant, updated, and hopefully reliable data. And this is what is currently being implemented in the healthcare sector. It has been being implemented in the retail, and now it's going to the healthcare sector. A good example of the UDI and the regulation around UDI related stuff in the US, but also other regions are going in the same direction. How to create data to medical devices in a standardized way, how to communicate the attributes in a standardized way. And I'm happy to let you know that this is the GDSM way to do it. There will be, I'm pretty sure, many more information and presentation about this story because it's happening now, it's important. But also the message here is that there are other things to explore also. So it's not just relevant for the medical devices, but also for other stuff. And once we have reliable data, available, updated data, then you can make sure that all the cost savings that I mentioned, and what is more important probably in the healthcare sector, also patient safety can be ensured in a much better way. There is another standard that we use to share data, which is the GS1 EDI. This is basically, again, a standardized business messages, how you can share transactional data. So before that, we were talking about master data related to a product. But now we are talking about transactional data, meaning, okay, if I want that product, I need to order, I need to have specific information, then I need to have an invoice, dispatch advice, or I want to have a inventory report, things like that. And of course, everything can be done by using a phone or a fax, but GS1 EDI provides you the structured messages, electronic messages to communicate these transactional data, these transactional messages all along the supply chain. It has been being adopted. It's quite old technology in terms of the EA and COM. XML is a recent type of GS1 EDI messages, but it has been being adopted, and it will be being adopted in the near future as well because it's needed. And once the electronic communication infrastructure is in place, it's far easier to adopt it. And the last way to exchange information, or the last piece, I would say, in the puzzle is the EPCIS. EPCIS is the way how you can share event-related data that finally enables you to have a visibility in the supply chain. What I meant is that every single event in the supply chain has attributes, like when you read a barcode at the warehouse, it has a when, where, what, and why. And EPCIS standard defining these attributes, defining the way how you can share these attributes. And just imagine you are a consumer, you, let's say, read a barcode in the store on a meat product, and that you can get information where this meat was coming from. It's basically the EPCIS that makes it available or makes it a reality. The same with a drug. If you read the barcode plus you add a lot number, then you can be able to retrieve the information where this drug was coming from. It's the ultimate, I would say, standard for traceability. In the same way like GDSM, there's a certification process behind that. So if a solution provider is claiming that, oh, we have a traceability solution, well, yes, they can have a solution, but if it's standardized, they need to be, let's say, certified or should be certified in order to ensure that they're following the right track. Because here the important part, you can share this traceability data with any of your partners in a standardized way. So it's not just for you, it's not just for your internal business, but also for other business partners. And if you use all these things that I mentioned in a comprehensive way, in a well-established way, maybe step by step, you will have this kind of supply chain where all the potential costs are taken out, where all the processes are optimized, and where you can have a huge return on investment in a really short term if you do it in the right way. Now, well, I think I'm on time. That was my part to provide you an insight to the world of GS1 standards. I'm pretty sure that it was quite, let's say, not not necessarily easy to understand, but I urge you to get more information either on websites or contacting the local GS1 member organizations where you can have the direct information about the specific things that I was talking about. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention and your time. 8 o'clock, I know it's early in the morning, and I do appreciate that you made it today. And well, my message is that you should come back in, let's say, 10-15 minutes, because we're going to officially launch the conference. So thank you very much, and take your last coffee before the event starts. Thank you very much.